Welcome to Thinking Too Hard About Anime, an episode-by-episode discussion of a beloved animated series. It's a little bit of history, a little bit of analysis, and a lot of over-examining the Japanese cartoons we love so much. I am your co-host, Noah Carden, and with me is...
Aaron J. Shelton.
And today, we're going to be covering the first episode of Cowboy Bebop, Session 1, Asteroid Blues.
A quick synopsis of the episode. A bounty hunter named Spike and his partner Jet Black head to the Tijuana asteroid colony on their ship, the Bebop. They're there to track down a bounty head named Asimov Solensen. He is wanted for murder and the theft of a dangerous combat drug known as Bloody Eye. Let's get going. Do you want to give us some production notes here, Noah?
So this episode was directed by Yoshiyuki Takei. It was written by Keiko Nobumoto, who we mentioned in the prologue episode. We've got a few little bits and bobs here and there. I think like the biggest kind of like neat thing about the episode is that the scene where Spike is whistling to himself is actually all ad-libbed.
Is that for both the English and Japanese?
So yes, it is for both. It was originally ad-libbed in the Japanese version where the director told them, hey, just, give us a listless tune to whistle while Spike is walking through this scene. So he does it. And then it's different if you listen to it in the English version. So they had Steve Bloom or potentially a different person whistle their own unique thing for the dub.
Steve Bloom famously can't whistle. They had to get the stunt whistler.
There's also, a few little visual Easter eggs, just kind of due to the time frame in which the show was coming out. In the scene where Spike goes to see Bull, Laughing Bull, you can actually see in amongst all the kind of electronics and junk that he has, you can actually see an original PlayStation in the overhead shot. And you can also see an N64 over Spike's shoulder when you get that first like straight on shot of him smoking the pipe. So yeah, some good old 90s video game technology sneaking into Cowboy Bebop.
The ramifications of that are either that they assume no other video game consoles would be made, or those are the only ones worth keeping. When the bombs dropped, those were the only ones that were kept safe. No one cared about their PS5.
Yeah, it's the good old like hardy Nintendo like craftsmanship, and the cartridges. They'll never go bad, right?
Oh yeah, but you can't scratch them. Just blow a little bit.
So something I also learned watching the cast commentary for the Japanese version is that the bit after Spike runs into Katarina Solensen, Asimov's wife, the little bit of like chitter chatter you get when you see Asimov noticing Spike talking to Katarina, that's all ad-libbed as well.
Okay, nice. Are there just bits where like, I don't know, man, just say stuff?
My fairly limited knowledge of anime dubbing, both in Japanese and in English, is pretty similar in that all of the animation is pretty much done, or at least all of like the keyframing and things like that. And then they have to go in and like match all the mouth flaps. Even on the Japanese version, it's not animated to the Japanese dialogue per se. Mm-hmm. So I can totally see them like, hey, we've got this scene where this particular character's face isn't facing, the camera or anything like that. So we don't have to match any particular mouth flaps. You don't have to fit in any one like bit of dialogue. So you can just kind of, give us a little like incidental stuff and we'll put it in this scene just to kind of, make it feel more real, which, I mean, kind of going through this entire show, it all feels like really, really real.
No, that makes sense. There's plenty of things you don't realize until you're at certain stages. I guess this wouldn't be post, even though animation's definition of post is a little topsy-turvy.
Yeah, totally. Also, a little fun fact, the three old men who are recurring background characters throughout the entire series, their names are Antonio, Carlos, and Jobim. And they're actually named after a Brazilian bossa nova composer, Antonio Carlos Jobim. So other than that, do we want to go over Spike and Jet real quick?
Yeah, I think it's our first introduction to them. Let's learn more about them.
Spike Spiegel, that's, the name that he gives. Whether or not that's ever actually his real name, we never really find out, because Spike's got a bit of a mysterious past as an ex-triad. He's also only 27, which, for somebody who's been like a hitman and a bounty hunter, that's pretty active. He's voiced in Japanese by Koichi Yamadera and in English by Steve Bloom. Koichi Yamadera would also voice characters like Ryoji Kaji in Neon Genesis Evangelion, so Masato's on and off again boyfriend / spy.
Okay.
Steve Bloom, this was actually one of his pretty much his first real breakout role in the anime dubbing community. He's obviously done some stuff before, but this was the role that made him a household anime name.
I mean, the Fool's got the waveform of his last line in the series tattooed on him. It's cool to see that he realizes the importance of it, not just for the fans, but also to his life.
Mm-hmm. So, a couple of things about Spike. He's got a spaceship, obviously. That was one of the mandates of the show when it was in pre-production. So his ship is the Swordfish 2, which is a modified space racer. So he's got a space hot rod that he flies around in, and it's got that very unique, very sharp design to it. His weapons, when he's not using his fists, which he kind of uses a variation of Jeet Kune Do, the style that Bruce Lee developed, he's swinging around his Jericho 941, which is a semi-automatic handgun, pretty standard in the 2070s. And Spike's look was inspired by the actor Yusaku Matsuda. He was in a bunch of movies. Probably the one that most Westerners may have seen is the Ridley Scott film Black Rain, where he's the main bad guy. But he's also got a little bit of Spike, that is. Spike has a little bit of a Lupin the Third inspiration as well, with his very lanky kind of build, and his boots and stuff like that kind of have that kind of cartoonish kind of aspect to him that you see a lot in Lupin the Third.
Yeah, the high waters.
The high waters, the very sort of colorful suit. Spike's partner, Jet Black, is a former ISSP police officer, or police detective, actually, as we learn later in the show. ISSP is the Intrasolar System Police, and they're we'll see plenty of them throughout the series. Jet is 36, and he's the old man of the show, which...
So anime logic?
Yes, anime logic.
You're in your 30s. You are near death's door.
Yes. He is balding and scarred, and he has a robot arm. He's just falling apart.
As someone in their late 30s, metaphorically speaking, yes. I relate to Jet.
So in Japanese, who's voiced by the late Unsho Ishizuka.
Aw.
Yes, he actually passed away in 2018.
Oh, damn.
He was also most noticeably the narrator and voice of Professor Oak in the Japanese Pokemon. He would also, we were actually talking about this before the show, he's the voice of Joseph Joestar in Stardust Crusaders and Diamond is Unbreakable, the third and fourth parts of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
I haven't gotten to part 3, but I know... Oh my God?
Yes. He is the voice there.
So any cool old man. Professor Oak, is he cool?
I mean, he's got all them Pokemon. He's the preeminent Pokemon professor.
To 10-year-olds, he is very cool.
Yes. He also voiced Van Hohenheim, who's Ed and Alphonse's father and Full Metal Alchemist. So yeah, he's got the older guy role locked in.
Yeah, he's anime dad.
Oh, I should also mention this for you. He was the second voice actor for Mr. Satan in Dragon Ball.
Oh, just an expansive career.
Yes. Jet, has his own spaceship, aside from the Bebop, which was a converted fishing spaceship, because of course it was. Jet ship is the Hammerhead, which is a converted construction vehicle, which we actually get to see him use in this episode.
Yeah, in a very cool way.
Yes, very cool. That's a little bit about Spike and Jet. They've been working together for about 3 years now. And you can definitely tell that I think it kind of shows in their relationship that they're friends and they've got a working relationship, but they're also very much about themselves, or like, having the sort of their own personal lives. They don't seem especially close.
I guess getting into the episode discussion, those first couple scenes, it does a really good job of showing who these characters are and their relationship. Spike, I mean, you right before the opening titles, you get the flashback of, well, him dying, kind of. He gets shot a lot.
Yeah. So I told you I had kind of a bombshell for this episode.
You did earlier.
So I've watched this show a lot, and I don't think I've ever actually noticed that the rose turns red in that opening scene.
I just noticed it this time too.
I don't think I've ever actually paid that close attention to like that one particular scene to realize that, yes, as the scene goes on, it goes from like the sort of monotone to a very vibrant red. And I'm going to just personally blame my color blindness on that.
Like, do you think there's significance in it turning into color?
I mean, I definitely think it holds a sort of significance in that it's both changes to red as we see like the violence erupt in the scene. So there's definitely sort of a blood connotation there, I think. But also it gains color because it's sort of the transfer from Spike's past to Spike's present, which most of the time when we see stuff in Spike's past throughout the series, it's always in sort of a sepia or like, a black and white effectively. But all of the current day stuff is all, the bright, vibrant colors of the show. So I definitely can kind of read it as that sort of transfer from past to present.
Is there a rose drop in the last episode or next to last episode? Are they calling their shot?
That's a very good question. I do not remember. I would not be surprised if there is one.
I mean, we'll find out.
Yes.
So yeah, that you have to keep listening. You have to find out.
Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it in like a year.
Yeah, at the end of the year. So Spike he's getting shot. He survived. Once we see him in the present, he's practicing Jeet Kune Do. All these like things that telegraph, hey, look at this cool, tough guy. But then they subvert it as they're having the mission brief when he's complaining about there not being any meat in the dish he's eating.
The good old bell peppers and beef.
I mean, and then it weirdly becomes a B plot in the episode of him just trying to get whatever food he can get. Throughout this episode, what I've sort of relearned about Spike is that he doesn't take bounty hunting very seriously, but he's so effortlessly good at the process. Maybe not at the final bit where you get the monies, but this whole time he is coolly playing Asimov and Katarina without you realizing it.
I mean, we kind of will learn later in the series, but he's got sort of this be like water, Bruce Lee kind of philosophy to a lot of things that unless it's something like deadly serious, he kind of just toys with. He doesn't take anything under like a certain like Wulong bounty to be, a real serious threat. And he kind of makes that very known whenever he talks about, whenever there's a briefing about a bounty that, him and Jet or like the other characters that come on later in the show, he always kind of like disregards it. It's like, oh, if it's under this amount, I'm not even going to worry about it. And he calls like, Asimov encountering like small fry throughout like the entire episode. So like he rarely takes it seriously unless it's like a life or death situation, it seems.
Not being too serious about the thing, about your main activity in the show is an interesting choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of what sets him apart from other characters. And then Jet, he's the dad.
Yeah.
He's the dad of the group. One, he's cooking for you. Two, and be grateful.
He's cooking with his big, like, Bret Hart blue blocker shades on.
Well, that flame's very bright. You gotta...
We'll turn on a light. It's like everybody's cooking and like doing martial arts in the dark on the
Bebop. It's
Bebop.
cool.
Like,
no, it's aesthetic.
They don't have enough money to run the lights on the ship for very long.
You would think that would be super cheap with in 2071, where we're past LED. But yeah, they're on auxiliary power. He's got to cook with butane, it seems like.
Yeah.
So maybe that's... I want to come back to this because I think but I do want to finish up my thought with Jet, where he's cooking. As soon as Spike complains about there not being any meat, he's like, look, we don't have any money. You have to go get this money. I don't care if you don't want to do it. Also, there's probably food in Tijuana, so go get it. I'm probably going to end up watching the subtitle version for this run.
Okay.
So the last line that sort of gets Spike out of his chair is he says, like, I hear Tijuana has like really good beef, or there must be some really good beef in Tijuana. And I don't think that's the line in the English dub.
He says, I hear the carnitas are out of this world.
Okay. Oh, you know what? You know why I thought it was different? Because I was a dumb kid and didn't know what carnitas were.
I see.
I thought carnitas was like a slang for a lady. Because I was a teen. And that was on my mind.
Yeah, I could totally understand that. Carnitas, senoritas. It makes sense.
I'm like, yeah, that's how Spanish works. I took 2 years of this stuff. But how you mentioned them, there's the possibility of them like, oh, well, there's no lights because they don't have any money to run lights. And the world building in this first episode is so subtle while being so effective. And a lot of that, I think, is with the mechanical design. There's a scene where we take a minute to see the Bebop going through the space gates. You know, there's a toll. They're checking in. We spend a good, 30 seconds on it without them saying, all right, Spike, we got to pay this toll because we're in hyperspace and that's how this works in this world. They just show it and we all get it and they don't make a big deal about it, but it's still, all of it is telling you yes, this is a space hopping adventure show. And look at these cool, but they're not slick. They're very functional. I don't want to say brutalist. It's not 2001: A Space Odyssey slick.
That's industrial.
Yes,
and I definitely think you're onto something when that whole scene, especially that whole scene of them going through the space gate. They're going through another dimension to go from one place to Mars, and then when they get to the end of it, they have to go through a damn toll. You have to go through a toll booth for your space travel.
I fucking hate tolls. I'm in Pennsylvania and the land of tolls, and just seeing that price ticker up, I'm like, no, I can't. They can't afford this. They can barely afford anything.
You think the Bebop's got easy pass?
No, they're holding up the whole line. They're counting change.
But that whole scene is also really indicative of the aesthetic of the show, in that when they're going through the gate, they're getting up to the toll booth and everything like that, you get a bunch of voiceover of the announcers, or the announcer saying prepare to have your ship checked and all this other stuff in a bunch of different languages, and you see like little buttons that say like, oh, if you want the language in Chinese or English in like the corner and stuff like that. It's very multicultural because it has to be, because it's the entire of humanity in space.
So when they land in Tijuana, the interesting thing I noticed on this rewatch is that it's familiar, but like in the background, you see the curved sort of landscape that curves up, Halo-esque for a modern reference. Just here's something that you recognize, but don't forget, we're in space.
Yeah.
I appreciate them not holding the audience's hand and saying, okay, here's how all this works. It's like, no, it's there. You'll get it.
And like the fact that the asteroid that they go to is named Tijuana, and there are other places in the show that kind of have like, are named after places that are back on Earth. And since Earth is not uninhabitable, but it's absolutely destroyed because of stuff we learn later in the series, the fact that when people go out into the universe, they're gonna name places after places they've already been or places that they're from. Like we see it today with like, you know, New York. It's the new version of York, and the sort of culture that kind of comes along with that. And I think just kind of knowing what I know about like the Gundam series, and this is related to the Gundam series in that they're both made by Sunrise, and a lot of places in like the Universal Century, the original Gundam series, also they'll reuse Earth place names for places in like space colonies. Gundam is super influential on like a whole bunch of stuff, and it being by the same production company and everything, it's going to carry forward into this show at least a little bit, and it just really helps with the world building and the sort of attitude of everything.
Yeah, I'm very glad they didn't go cheesy like Tijuana to Space Mexico.
Neo Tijuana.
That would have been fine for my personal taste.
Neo Baja.
I'm gonna go to Space Spring Break in Neo Cancun. Part of the episode is the bounty head Asimov, who's trying to offload this combat drug Bloody Eye. He has to use it as an example for a buyer, and it also gets him out of a very violent and horrific shootout. Mm-hmm. It seems like it slows down time for you essentially, and I love the effect they use for it to give Asimov's POV while he's on the drug, because I think it's very simple, which I like. Of course, screen goes red. We get a lot more static, and the animation, the only way I can describe it is as if they took a still frame of the animation and shaked it in front of the camera in like slow mo. But like each move took like a second.
Yeah.
It's if you haven't seen it, I mean, please watch the episodes as you're listening to these. But I'm sure you can find it online and really pop up. And I like this effect, and and I thought it would be fun, depending on how you feel about drugs, I guess. I thought it would be interesting to sort of point out some of the visual metaphors for drugs in film that I like or I find interesting to see. Not people doing drugs, but how do you represent what a drug feels like on film or TV? And I think it can be done very stupidly, but here are some examples of ones that I think do it well or just have interesting little bits to them. So buckle up. Here's some drugs. Woohoo! So I feel like I have to start this off with Requiem for a Dream, 2000, directed by Aaron Aronofsky, and the quick cut montages that he used whenever someone uses the drug. Not just heroin, but everything like coffee. There's a quick cut montage. And I mentioned this because I think it has penetrated a lot of pop culture. It's very recognizable. People have parodied it. Like there's an episode of C-Lab 2021, to get that Adult Swim connection into it, where they parody the same effect.
I remember that.
So one, because of its impact, but two, because that movie is all about motif and repetition. And what I think those drug montages do, I think part of their purpose is to dehumanize it a little bit. We're not seeing an actual person do these things. We're just seeing these clips. They're sort of a throwaway image. It takes the focus off the use of the drugs and puts the focus of the movie onto the characters and what they're going through because of what they're doing. But on the lighter side, 21 Jump Street, 2012, directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. So it's Jonah Hill, Channing Tatum. They take the drug called HFS, which stands for holy fucking shit. And a few reasons I like this. One, it's funny. It's really fucking funny. Two, I think it's very smart in a comedy where you're like, we have to stop this drug dealer. Well, let's make up a dumb fake drug. So it's not, there's a level of, you're removed a little bit from the real world horrors that drugs can cause. They do dumb things. They have weird hallucinations, sort of typical stuff. But what makes it, why I mention it is one, the title cards, because the drug has 5 phases. And when each phase comes into play, there is this crazy animated title card with the number and name of the phase, and then this like Lisa Frank collage of imagery and sound as it's going on. On top of this drug trip isn't just like, well, let's just show off visually, or wouldn't this be funny? It is plot relevant. It's because Jonah Hill does these drugs that he is able to ingratiate himself with a group of kids that are actually selling the drug. I think it takes a lot of effort to make something that can be very throwaway so ingrained into the plot of the movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Next is Train Spotting, 1996. Danny Boyle. Ewan McGregor has an overdose on heroin. And when he does, he sinks into the floor on this red carpet, and the red carpet sort of slides down with him. And it's very reminiscent of a coffin being lowered into a plot. And then throughout his overdose, when we see Ewan McGregor's POV, you see the size of the wall of him being lower than everyone else. You see like the red carpet on either side. Again, very simple. It was a practical in-camera effect, which I always love and appreciate, but it's also simple to show how close he was to death and sort of, I mean, you're beyond rock bottom at that point visually.
Right.
It's very cool, very effective. Beavis and Butthead Do America, 1996, Mike Judge. Beavis. These aren't the best guys. These are just some ones that stand out. Beavis takes peyote by accident, and then it turns. What I like is like right before his trip is he tells Butthead that everything's getting weird and it looks like a music video. And then we go into a music video. The song is White Zombies, Rat Finks, Suicide Tanks, and Cannibal Girls. And that whole section of the film, I thought Rob Zombie had actually directed that bit, but it's just very inspired by his art. You see, there's like fun demons, sort of a Coop style art. Beavis and Butthead are like demonic versions of themselves working at Burger World. It's interesting because it feels like at that time, everything that parents were worried about when it came to Beavis and Butthead, sort of a weird satanic panic sort of uptick for a split second there in society. And I think it feels like they were actually addressing that somewhat. I could be reading into this because, look, I saw Beavis and Butthead Do America in theaters. I was at that age. It was only PG-13. My parents did not want me to go, but that was, I guess it affected me more than I thought. And then finally, the This Is Your Brain on Drugs ad campaign. I know there's 2 versions. I think there's a 3rd version. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But in 1987, classic, everyone knows it, parodied. This is your brain. We're going to show an egg. This is your brain on drugs. We're going to fry that egg. Very like height of war against drugs, Reagan era. We don't know what drugs are. We just know they're bad. Sort of explanation. Like, wait, which drugs though?
Yeah.
Which drugs fry your brain? But I like that they redid it in 97. And it starred, I don't know if you remember this.
I remember this. This is the version I'm more familiar with.
Because it's Rachel Lee Cook. Black and white, moody. And she's like, this is your brain. Shows an egg. And then this is your brain on heroin, which I'm glad they specified the drug. I think this was a few years after Kurt Cobain's suicide. So I think they're like, yeah, we better talk about this specifically. And then she just smashes the egg on the stovetop and then proceeds to destroy an entire diner, saying that each swing is your family or your self-respect or your future.
She fucks up that kitchen.
And like, we both remember it. This was more than 20 years ago. Clearly an effective metaphor. I mean, I've never done heroin, so maybe it worked.
Hey, yeah, you know.
Showing drug use can be iffy and can be difficult. And I think this episode, even though it's not a fun.
Even it's a combat drug.
Yeah. Even though it's like a make 'em up drug, it's cool that they just took a little bit of time to show it off.
Like you had mentioned when they first show where it goes all like he sees red and it gets all staticky and stuff like that. The other thing that I like is that while it's also like slow-mo, it's also like kind of hitchy in spots. Like the part in the scene where the bullet is coming towards him and it seems to like stop and start and then kind of stop a little bit longer as he like dodges out of the way of it. Just something to that kind of the speed ramp kind of hitching of the animation that happens when he's on the bloody eye that I think is very interesting.
He dodged the bullet. The drug allowed him to dodge a bullet, and that's insane. And I think that's what makes what happens later on so more impressive. When he goes to see Sitting Bull, when Spike leaves, he says, I hope that you're blessed by Wakantanka, Wakantanka. And right, let me go ahead and say, like, sorry if I mispronounce anything. I'm like, oh, what is that? So I looked it up. And what I discovered was that it is a term for the sacred or divine for the Lakota Sioux. It can literally translate to great mystery, great spirit. It's an idea that reflects a common view among Native American tribes that the natural world is part of a spirit being or it's infused with spirit. And he's not just saying like a specific deity, but it's sort of the spiritual force that they feel inhabits everything. I don't know what it is in the English dub.
I think it's something along the lines of Wakantanka, bless or like watch your soul or guide your soul.
It's so impressive how deep they went into making sure that they try to get everything as accurate as possible.
I mean, they definitely put in the research to make this show what it is, and it totally shows. You know, this thing that I don't think a large portion of Americans would have any idea what it is or what it means or anything like that. They definitely, you know, I mean, obviously I am not of Native American ancestry, but I would actually love to hear what somebody of that background has to say about Laughing Bull in the series and his kind of portrayal.
Yeah, because he comes up a few more times, and again like minimal research on Walk and Talkin'. Sorry if I butchered it. I apologize. Do
you remember what Laughing Bull calls Spike in the Japanese version?
Swimming bird, right?
Okay, yeah, it's the same. Yeah, I'm 90% sure most of the dialogue is gonna be like one for one, or you know, as close to as they can. They've obviously got to make some considerations for the American audience or the English speaking audience. But yeah, okay. I was just curious if they kept it the same or not.
No, the dub and sub are very close. Why do you think, and this might be a dumb question, a jokey question, why do you think the goons that we see throughout the episode, why are they wearing dumb cowboy hats?
Because it's TJ, man. South of the border. All of them are wearing like cowboy outfits. And I think a large part of that is because of the very obvious influence on this particular episode, which is Desperado and Robert Rodriguez's, was it El Mariachi?
Mm-hmm. That was
series of films.
Yes, we'll discuss it here in a later section, but keep going.
Yeah. But no, I think like this whole episode is very obviously influenced by that whole series of films, especially Desperado. And I think just having, that sort of Wild West, Tex-Mex kind of feel to the area that they're in, into, the show is called Cowboy Bebop. Like, I think they just kind of went with that. It's supposed to be some sort of like Central American cartel that Asimov is running from, with all the bloody eye and stuff like that. So it was just sort of the aesthetic that went along with that.
Yes, I agree with you. It's to sell the locale,
Mm-hmm.
sell the environment. But I have a theory. So if we look at the people who are actually dangerous in this episode, Asimov, Spike, Jet, they're not dressed as like goofy cowboys. All the other goons are, though. So I feel like it might be a way to visually separate, like, here a little bit of visual irony of like, oh, the cowboys, the classic Western look. Well, they suck and they die fast.
Yeah.
The people who are dangerous and who are effective are not trying to fit into, they're not worried about a look.
No, I can totally see that. There's definitely the goons are all cowboyed up to make themselves look big and bad kind of thing.
Also, I concede from last episode, his hair is green.
Okay.
His hair is green. I just remember I remember watching the show, and maybe it was just the DVD at the time I was watching that made me think this otherwise. Or maybe I was just projecting myself. I have black hair. So maybe I was just projecting my image onto Spike, which is very possible and probably, and it happened.
Yeah.
But like, I remember seeing key art and visuals or like merchandise. I'm like, why is his hair green? It's black. Like, no, I must hang up that tired argument. It's very green.
Yes, it is. Like, because of my color blindness, I always thought it was just like a brown, but yeah, no, like looking at it now, like really focusing on it, it's green. I don't know. Everybody's got like kind of normal hair color except for Spike for some reason. And Vicious, I guess.
No, it's just curious that it's in this very grounded show. You still have your protagonist with crazy color hair.
You think it's because he's a Martian?
Ooh.
Do you think Spike's hair is just naturally green because he was born on Mars?
So you don't see like the antenna that he's hiding.
Yes. Yeah, that's why he has his hair so big.
You want to talk about this fight?
Oh, hell yeah, I do. I'm looking at the IMDb page to get the director and all that stuff for this episode, and in 3 different like thumbnails is Spike tossing off the sombrero with the poncho on.
Some of the bits that I pointed out. One, go watch it. 2, to begin the fight, Spike throws a vial of bloody eye into the air, then shoots it, and it's like it feels like a starter pistol. Because as soon as he shoots it, music kicks in. That I forget the name of the track. I had the soundtracks. I should remember this.
Rush. That's the title of the track. It's Rush.
But this very jazzy song kicks in. The choreography is very clean. There's that one shot when Katarina, it's a POV of Katarina. She's holding a gun. trying to get a clear shot of them as they're fighting. And I just, man, film's cool. Man, visual media's cool. It's just a shot that works so well.
I was actually I have in my notes, I have that noted down is like the way that they move the camera through the animation, and then suddenly that cut over to Katarina's point of view, and you see like the pistol. You can obviously tell that she's trying to like line up a shot on somebody. Like, I don't think, like, up to that point, I don't think I've ever really seen like a POV like gunshot in an animation before. Like, it's always, from the third person.
To also counterpoint that, you rarely see POV gunplay in live action. And it's that one shot communicates so much about the stakes of the situation, where Katarina's at. You can still see that Asimov he's coming off the drug. He's feeling the effects of it. He's not as strong up against Spike. Also, Spike is a very good combatant. So that they show that here. And I love there's a double when Spike, like, he slides across the table, kicks Asimov in the stomach, and there's like that double impact where you see it in the wide, and then they go for that close up on top of it. I love animated fight scenes so much, and I am obsessed with how they feel so much more impactful than most live action. And I think part of that is because they can, between each shot, they can play with time however they want, right?
So like with animation, you can exaggerate a lot of things, and the amount of like frames per second, the amount of like movements per frame, that kind of stuff allows for a lot more detail. And like you said, like there's the slowdown, like you can kind of stretch and squash time in a way that doesn't feel unusual, because you watch any film with like slow-mo, you can obviously tell that they're slowing down, or they're slowing down the frames, even if it's only a tiny bit. And with animation, you can play everything at effectively the same frame rate, but have things happen slower. But yeah, I just think with animation, the large part of it is you can keep everything super clean, and you can emphasize and exaggerate things to really help with help with the impact of, like, punches landing, kicks landing, that kind of thing. You can do a lot of stuff that seems kind of extraordinary, like, just like punching a table apart, and that kind of stuff.
Because I think Asimov flips up the table, punches through it, and they're like, that table hangs there in the air, but you're not like, it's not off-putting. It doesn't seem stylized, and like for the reason you said, because you can in animation, it's so seated into it.
And like you were saying, just with so much like live action fight scenes and stuff like that, it's real easy to kind of lose track of things, because you want to have a certain motion in the scene, and it's very easy to like overshake a camera or constantly be cutting between all of these different parts of a fight scene. And especially more and more recently in live action films, there's a lot of like quick cuts in shots in a fight scene that kind of disorients. And I think especially with like Cowboy Bebop and animation, you can do a lot more in a single wide shot in a fight,
because they can choose any angle, any action. And that's, one of the powers of animation, where live action, like you said, quick cuts, well, that's to cover things up. And sometimes you're just
totally.
And actors aren't always fighters, and movies don't always get the time that they need to really show off the action like they should. There is a wonderful video essay from the YouTube channel Every Frame of Painting. I don't think they post anymore, but there's one called Jackie Chan, How to Do Action Comedy. Not only does it talk about what the title says, but it's just, here's how action should be done, and how, like this episode does, it's about clarity. And that's like one of the key elements that we forget about in an action scene.
Like, I think that clarity is a large reason why, like, the John Wick films have been so popular and so well regarded, is that a lot of their fights are very, like, these wide open, very easy to see what is actually going on kind of fight scenes. There's not a lot of, like, super close in, a bunch of different cuts.
No, John Wick is definitely the exception.
Yeah.
Where they went in knowing like, well, this is the movie, guys. is the fighting. And it's not every movie. Unfortunately, not every movie can have Keanu Reeves who just drains himself in preparation and on screen.
I always end up thinking about like the Transformers movies when I think about bad fight scenes, just because one, all of the designs are just so cluttered and all over the place.
Because there's too because you can doesn't mean you should, and there's too much information in the designs of the Transformers. So when you look at them, your brain's going crazy, and you don't quite your brain can't easily, because a little physiology. What you see isn't necessarily what you see. Half of it is your brain making it up and filling in the gaps. So on those Transformer designs, your brain's like, I don't know what to fucking do, and it feels disorienting.
I was actually just reading about like how magenta isn't a real color. It's just something that your brain tricks you into seeing.
What?
This morning. Yeah, so magenta is a color that happens between or violet and red. But if you ever look at like the like electromagnetic spectrum, red is on the infrared side and violet is on the UV side, so they can't touch. So whatever color that is, your brain is just kind of making it up.
That's weirdly existentially frightening.
Yeah. Your brain is crazy, folks.
Don't trust it.
So back to this fight scene.
For the very first episode, for this pilot episode, you have karate, you have a shootout, you have aerial combat, you got a little bit of sexiness, you have a spaceship chase, and you have like this very, on top of all this insanity going on, you have this very like heartfelt and tragic ending. This episode is jammed packed, and I didn't realize how jam-packed it was until this rewatch and talking about it with you. It's insane that they did this much.
God, yeah, it's just so much happens in like these like 25 minutes. It's a hell of a kickoff to the series. So I do have one little thing that is just a little visual that they give to show the passage of time that I really, really like. And that's when Spike gets ambushed by Asimov as he's about to like light a cigarette. And after like he passes out, you see the cigarette laying there, or I think you actually see him drop the cigarette in the lighter. You see it sitting there for a second, and then he gets dropped. And then later, when Jet comes to like wake him up, you see that cigarette again, and it's burned all the way down. I just think that showing that initial kind of like setup and then showing it again when Jet shows up is just such a neat little visual signifier that, hey, you know, however long it took, it was, you know, there's definitely been a decent amount of time that has passed.
Again, is a detail that they didn't have to do.
Yeah.
You know, but damn it, draw the cigarette, someone.
And like the detail on like the lighter and the ship and all this other stuff, there's so much like little stuff in the mechanical details that is really interesting. When Spike first leaves the Bebop, actually, you see Jet touch a screen and it says like magnetic landing bay or something like that. So you see him turn off the magnets that keep the ship on the top deck before he jets off into Tijuana. Like there's just so much little mechanical details and like screen details and stuff like that. That's really, really cool.
Man, they put so much work into just this episode, and I hate that it's this episode that sort of stunted their initial their initial growth.
Yeah, I don't think this episode even aired initially. I think when the network first got it, they were like, whoa, this is way too violent to be putting on at like 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning for the kiddos. Let's start with the second episode where the dog shows up.
And it's not just Flash, because there's this wonderful bit where Katarina, they're escaping Spike. I think after the fight scene, they're escaping Spike. And Katarina looks over and like Asimov yells at her for something. And then they just hold on her face for like a few frames. And you feel it. You're like, here's the point where she has realized that she is fucked up. And it is too late to change. The show's not always this violent.
No.
It can be, but like Katarina and Asimov get lit up by the police. And there's that beautiful shot where she's falling through space and the red eye, she was pregnant, air quotes, but that's how they carried the drugs. You see her, she's getting shot up and then all the red eye flows out in 0G. I think it's genuinely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
While also being very visually interesting.
You see so much of the story, not necessarily through her, but you see how it's affecting her and the situation that she has kind of found herself in. When they're making their escape, she's constantly begging Asimov to like stop. She has that realization that, it's not going to stop. It's only ever going to end badly. She kills Asimov and then she looks at Spike like right before they just get destroyed by the police vessels, and it's just so sad. The debris, the vials and everything they're kind of flowing around her as she floats in space dead is this sort of tragic flower that has been destroyed.
I'm getting upset again.
Yeah, it's like really gut-wrenching, and you can see that like it messes with Spike. Like you can tell that, hey, I thought this was going to be some easy job, and it turned out like it's real messed up. Like he wasn't quite expecting it to go this way. It's supposed to be some small fry drug runner, and he got attached in a way, and it just kind of sticks with him for a bit.
Well, that's the other thing. She is not the bounty. There could have been a reality where she got a much lighter sentence, and she could, still be alive. And you see him see that possibility deteriorate, because it's not the look of a man who's like, oh no, there went my money.
Yeah,
it's, oh no, this horrible thing happened to someone who should not have been in this situation in the first place.
I mean, you can definitely tell when we get to like the end of the episode, and it's sort of that repeat of the start where Jet is making more bell peppers and beef and everything, and he goes to call Spike for dinner, and he's not in the same spot. He's up on the bridge of the ship.
He's karate brooding.
Yes, he's doing his martial arts and brooding on the bridge of the ship, but you can tell just kind of from the fact that he's not in the same spot, that he's looking out a window and kind of meditating about the whole thing, that it's messed with him, and he has to like move on.
Yeah, I mean it's a nice circular sort of bit. It's cool to end up back there.
Stuff happens, and you just got to move on. You gotta continue with your life. That kind of thing. On a somewhat lighter note, I think it's cute that apparently Jet and Spike share cigarettes.
Someone cares about you if you light a cigarette and they toss it to you in 0G. As we talked about before, Cowboy Bebop was originally conceived of as a movie, and Watanabe has stated that he treats each episode as its own individual film, and it changes genre from episode to episode. So we thought it'd be fun to give you some movie recommendations as sort of companion pieces for each episode. And I have 3 here. The first one is obviously Desperado, as you mentioned earlier. 1995, written and directed by Robert Rodriguez, starring Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek. Asimov and Katerina are clear parallels to their characters in the film. It's just a really good action movie, and it sort of does what Terminator 2 did for Terminator, where it's just sort of it's a sequel remake, where it's like, oh, now that I have money, let me do all the ideas I had that I couldn't do before. And there's a rocket launcher and a guitar case. I think you should check it out. The Lover's on the Run from the Law, as with Asimov and Katerina. It made me think of Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, directed by Arthur Penn, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. It's a very loose telling of the two criminals from the Depression era. It's pertinent in film history because it sort of marked the arrival of what was New Hollywood, which was the late 60s and 70s. You had a lot of filmmakers who were coming from film school for the first time, where they actually had a film education. They were raised by film, and they were showing their influences there. We had Vietnam going on, which, to reflect that, films got much more graphic with their violence and their depiction of sex. Spoilers for Bonnie and Clyde, they die in the end. And they die very gruesomely. And that's sort of why it's pertinent within the history of film. That ending is so graphic. Even now, not just for the time. It's pretty brutal. But I don't know how to explain this. This is the one I really want to talk about, because when I was thinking about these movies for this episode, this one popped into my head, and I don't really know why. And so this is sort of, I have to exercise it now from me. Like, I went and rewatched it because I did like a song getting stuck in your head. You just have to pull through it. It's The Way of the Gun, 2000, written and directed by Christopher McQuarrie. McQuire. There's 3 pronunciations. One of those must be close. So he's best known as the writer of The Usual Suspects. He co-wrote Edge of Tomorrow, and he directed the last 2 Mission Impossible films, Rogue Nation and Fallout. It stars... Have you heard of this movie?
I've heard of Way of the Gun, but I don't think I've ever seen it.
It's Ryan Phillippe, Benicio del Toro, Juliette Lewis, and James Caan is also in it. It's just an interesting bit of late 90s, early 2000s crime thriller. It's basically Benicio del Toro and Ryan Phillippe are 2 real pieces of shit, and they kidnap Juliette Lewis, who is pregnant, who's a surrogate for a rich family who happens to also be a money launderer for the mob. And then, a crime thriller. People get double-crossed, bad things happen. And like I said, there's, the pregnancy angle, maybe, to, the criminal aspect. There's a lot of set pieces in Mexico. So it's tangentially related, but it's just, I think it's interesting in a few ways. One, it starts out with a very strong action scene and ends with a very strong shootout in Mexico, sort of Wild Bunch-esque. Mm-hmm. But the middle of the film is just sort of people talking. And in the middle of the film, James Caan and Benicio del Toro have these few quiet scenes together. James Caan plays a bagman who he's there to negotiate / try and kill Benicio del Toro and Ryan Phillippe. Mm-hmm. But they have this sort of in Heat, where they go to the diner. They just have this scene and they're just talking about well, we're older, and being older in this business is horrible. There's some very good subtle work that James Caan is doing in these things. It's not a full recommend, and because the first 10 minutes are... So the director specifically said, I wanted you to not like these 2 main characters. And that's what he does in the first 10 minutes. And there's a lot of dialogue with a lot of not woke stuff being said. But like he did what he accomplished. You're not supposed to like these are bad dudes. You're not supposed to like them. And there's an interesting little backstory to the movie, because so he won an Academy Award for The Usual Suspects. He's like, cool, I got that. Everyone's going to come knocking on my door for my next movie, but no one wanted what he was writing. Like, he was working on an Alexander the Great biopic that wasn't going anywhere, and he was very frustrated. No one quote. And then you slowly start to realize no one in Hollywood is interested in making your film. They're interested in making their film. So that, he didn't want to do this work for hire stuff. Then he had coffee with Benicio del Toro. He asked him, hey man, why don't you make another crime film? He said he didn't want to be typecast as a crime guy, but he conceded. He's like, I don't have anything to lose. I'm unemployed. So I better write this crime movie. And he sort of did it as like a hate letter.
Yeah.
To a degree.
I can understand that.
There are these weirdly human moments on top of these very nihilistic bits. Again, I don't quite know why I'm talking about this for this episode. I just got to get it out of my brain.
I gotcha.
But as a fun fact, the trailer uses Break Stuff by Limp Bizkit. In the first part.
Oh, boy.
And then Twister in the Sun later on by Violent Femmes. Because the 2000s. So two definite recommendations and a maybe. It's free on Vudu as of this recording. That streaming site everyone uses.
Totally. Well, I think that wraps it up for our first session of Cowboy Bebop. So thank you all very much for listening. It means the world to us. If you want to help us out, which we know that you do, please share this with anybody that you think would love to hear people like really dissect anime, or just people that want to listen to other people talk about anime.
Get everybody their stuff together. Blow the scene of your old podcast and get them on this new one.
Let us know what you think. Be sure to review us on whatever platform that you are listening. Whatever platform that you're listening to this on would be greatly appreciated. You can also email us at thinkingtoohardpod@gmail.com. And you can also get to us on Twitter at thinkinganime. Thank you very much for listening. And we will see you in 2 weeks with session number 2, Stray Dog Strut. I've been Noah Carden.
And I've been Aaron J. Shelton.
And we've been Thinking Too Hard.